Sophie and Victor reached the far corner of the basement. The floor was made of old redwood planks, sea-worn and gray. Sophie knelt, feeling for a notch, a sign, anything. Suddenly, her fingers found a brass ring hidden beneath a layer of grime. She pulled. The floor didn't just open. It slid away, revealing a small, stone-lined chamber. Inside, there were no gold bars or stolen deeds. There were thousands of photographs. Larry Dallas had spent his entire life documenting the real Santa Monica. Not the glamorous celebrities, but the waitresses, the janitors, the poets, and the families who lived in the shadows of the palms. And next to the photos were hundreds of letters from Jack Tripper to the people he had helped, the meals he had cooked for free, the small, quiet acts of kindness that he had never mentioned to anyone. "It's not a vault of treasure," Sophie said, her voice echoing in the chamber. "It's a vault of witnesses. This is the truth, Sarah. My father and Larry didn't just share a lie, they shared a responsibility. They were the keepers of the neighborhood's heart." Even Sarah Graves was silent. The live stream reflected a reality that couldn't be debunked, a life built on a foundation of genuine human connection. Chapter 30. The Eternal Architecture. The heist story was forgotten, replaced by the archive of the boardwalk. The medical bills were paid through a foundation set up to preserve the photos. Larry Dallas recovered enough to see his work displayed in a gallery at the Santa Monica Museum of Art. Jack and Janet returned from their cruise to find their daughter a hero and their legacy more secure than ever. One evening, the whole group gathered on the balcony of apartment 201. The wicker table had returned for the night, and Jack was serving his famous, now perfected soufflé. "You know," Jack said, looking out at the boardwalk where a new generation was laughing and dancing. "Jack," Janet said, taking his hand, "a lie is just a temporary roof. It kept us dry while we built the walls." Sophie stood next to Victor, watching the sunset. Jack smiled, that same mischievous twinkle as bright as the day he first walked into the apartment. "I was thinking about the kitchen," Jack said. "It could use a little redecorating. I know a guy who's very good with threads." Mr. Furley, now a centenarian but still wearing a shocking shade of lavender, raised his glass. "Just as long as you don't touch the bathroom light, Jack. I'm still not sure who left it on in 1978. The laughter that followed was the sound of a building that was finally, perfectly, eternally complete. The architecture was solid, the foundation was love, and in apartment 201, the door was always open, the kisses were always real, and company, well, company was the only thing that made the house a home. Chapter 31. The Flavor of Inheritance. The success of the archive exhibition brought a new kind of pressure to Tripper's table. Sophie found herself constantly under the microscope of high-end food critics who were looking for a flaw in her honest cuisine. One afternoon, while reorganizing the storage room in the flower shop's cellar, a space Janet had kept mostly for rare bulbs and antique gardening tools, Sophie found a heavy, rusted metal box. "What's this, Mom?" Sophie asked, dusting off the lid. Janet looked up from her ledger, a curious light in her eyes. "I haven't seen that since we moved the big lilies back in '85. It belonged to Jack's mother, but he always said it was empty." They pried it open to find not an empty box, but a single, brittle envelope and a small glass vial containing a dried, dark, crimson spice. The letter was addressed to Jack, written in a shaky but elegant hand. "Jack, this is the salt of the earth, the secret our family carried from the old country. It's not just a spice. It's a memory. Use it only when the fire in your heart feels cold." Sophie felt a chill. The spice smelled of smoke, honey, and something ancient. She realized that while Jack had built his career on French techniques and Professor Beaumont's teachings, there was a whole world of his own heritage he had never tapped into, perhaps because he was too busy maintaining the facade. "Mom," Sophie whispered, "I think I know how to make the next menu. I'm going to cook the Tripper heritage." Chapter 32. The Corporate Shadow. While Sophie was experimenting with the ancient spice, a new storm was brewing on the horizon. A conglomerate known as Nexus Foods had begun buying up the remaining independent leases on the boardwalk. They were a faceless entity, represented by a group of young, aggressive lawyers who spoke in terms of optimization and synergy. "We're not here to destroy," Mr. Tripper, the lead lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, said as he sat in the restaurant. "We're here to elevate. We want to turn Tripper's Table into a global brand. 10 locations by next year. A line of frozen entrees, a reality TV show with Sophie as the judge." Jack leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Elevate? You want to turn my heart into a microwavable box?" "We want to ensure it survives the next century," Thorne replied coldly. "We can change the zoning laws with a single phone call." The threat was clear. If Jack didn't sell, Nexus would surround them with corporate chain restaurants, effectively choking out the authentic vibe that made Tripper's Table unique. Larry Dallas, who had been listening from the bar, snorted. "Synergy? I've got your synergy right here, Thorne. It's called Get Out of Our House." But Victor was worried. He knew the financial power of Nexus. "They don't just buy buildings, Sophie. They buy reputations. If we don't play along, they'll start a smear campaign that will make Sarah Graves look like a fangirl." Chapter 33. The Night of 1,000 Lilies. To fight back, Janet suggested a gala, a night of 1,000 lilies, to celebrate the boardwalk's history and the unveiling of Sophie's new heritage menu. It was a gamble. If the critics didn't like the new direction, or if Nexus managed to sabotage the event, the Tripper legacy would be over. The night of the gala, the boardwalk was transformed. Janet had covered every surface in white lilies, their intoxicating scent mixing with the salt of the sea. She had used the salt of the earth in every dish, creating flavors that felt like they were pulled from a dream. But as the first course was served, a group of protesters appeared outside the restaurant, carrying signs that read, "Tripper's Table, built on lies, and ditch the grifters." "It's Marcus Thorne," Victor hissed, watching from the window. "He hired them to disrupt the service." Jack stood up, his silver hair catching the candlelight. He didn't call the police. He didn't shout. Instead, he walked out to the protesters, carrying a tray of small, warm pastries Sophie had just made. "I know you're here to work," Jack said to the leader, a young man who looked more hungry than angry. "But even a worker needs to eat. Taste this. It's my family's history. If you still want to shout after you've eaten, I'll join you." One by one, the protesters took a pastry. The silence that followed was the most powerful thing Jack had ever seen. The flavor of the salt of the earth seemed to bypass their anger and reach something deeper, a shared humanity. By the time the main course was served inside, the protesters had laid down their signs and were sitting on the boardwalk, listening to the music. Chapter 34. The Deconstruction of Thorne. The gala was a triumph. But Marcus Thorne wasn't finished. He appeared at the end of the night, his face twisted in frustration. "You think a few pastries will stop us?" Thorne sneered. "We own the debt on your flower shop, Mrs. Tripper. We bought it from the bank this morning. If you don't sign the merger, we foreclose on Monday." Janet didn't flinch. She pulled a small, silver key from around her neck. "The Tripper family has had a perpetual trust since 1982, set up by Professor Beaumont himself. That trust covers any and all debt incurred by the flower shop or the restaurant in perpetuity. Your purchase is null and void." Thorne's face went pale. He hadn't counted on the architecture of Beaumont's foresight. The old man had built a legal sanctuary that was as solid as the arch Sophie had found in the blueprints. Larry Dallas stepped forward, his camera flash blinding Thorne. "Smile for the headline, Marcus. Nexus Foods. The Emperor has no clothes." Chapter 35. The Eternal Sunset. The sun set over Santa Monica one final time in the pages of their story. The boardwalk was secure. Nexus Foods had retreated, their lawyers defeated by a combination of legal foresight and the power of a single, ancient spice. Sophie and Victor were now the unofficial king and queen of the coast, their partnership having survived the fire of corporate war. Jack and Janet sat on their balcony, the same wicker table between them. They looked at the Pacific, their hands entwined. "We did it, architect," Janet whispered. "No," Jack replied, leaning his head on hers. "We didn't just do it, we lived it. Every lie, every laugh, every burnt souffle. It was all part of the design. A soft knock came at the door. Uncle Jack? Aunt Janet? Sophie's voice was full of excitement. You have to see this. A group of kids just moved into 301. They asked me if they needed a brotherhood certificate to live there. Jack laughed, a sound that carried across the water, joining the ghosts of Furley, the Ropers, and the old man. Tell them to come in, Jack called out. We've been waiting for them. The architecture was finally complete. The lie was gone. The truth was eternal. And in apartment 201, the door was always open. Chapter 36. The Bitter Root. With the defeat of Nexus Foods, Sophie hoped for a period of calm to refine her heritage menu. However, the culinary world was never truly at rest. A former sous chef of Jack's, a man named Julian Varga, who had been fired years ago for attempting to sell Jack's recipes, resurfaced in the headlines. Julian had opened a rival restaurant in Beverly Hills called the Gilded Facade, and he was claiming that he was the true inheritor of the Salt of the Earth recipe. He alleged that Jack had stolen the vial from Julian's family during their time at the Culinary Institute. It's a lie, Sophie, Jack said, his hands trembling as he read the tabloid. Julian's family didn't even come from the same region. My mother gave me that vial on her deathbed. He doesn't need it to be true, Dad, Sophie replied. He just needs to plant the seed of doubt. The critics are already starting to ask questions. Sophie realized she had to do more than just cook. She had to prove the provenance of their heritage. She decided to track the lineage of the spice back to its source, a small, secluded village in the hills of Calabria, Italy. Chapter 37. The Ghost of Cindy Snow. Before they could depart for Italy, Janet found a bundle of old letters tucked into the back of a drawer in the apartment. They were from Cindy Snow, written in the years after she moved out.